when you start showing, a heroine or a hero just like steamrolling over people, especially if you're setting it in a medieval time when it was very masculine dominated in the military sense, and you're showing a female character like just batting them aside effortlessly, you're asking a lot of the viewer, and in this era, you're asking too much of the viewer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel. I'm Reina Creole, and this is yet another installment of An Audience with the Queen, and I am so excited to have Douglas A. Burton, author of The Heroine's Labyrinth, here on the channel with me. How are you doing?
Awesome. I'm very excited to be here to talk with you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're here because we had a very, very good discussion in our first interview. Well, I guess this is like a two-parter where we pretty much talked about, the term girl boss, how it's kind of been thrown around without like a really good definition or baseline. So we can try to vet if something truly is a girl boss or not really. It's more about something else.
Right. Yeah. And when you recommended we talk about this, I loved it because your goal, if I understand right, was, there's all the, like you said, it's a pejorative term now. When you say girl boss, it's viewed as it's a negative term. And it describes, an unlikable type of heroine that's kind of taking over in a lot of these stories. And the problem is that I like heroines. You like hero. I think everybody likes heroines. So, I don't think anybody really wants to hate heroines. So the goal with your discussion, as you pitched it to me or explained it to me, was, how can we figure out what is wrong with it so that we can really focus in on what we like about heroines? Because the love of these stories, lovable heroines, really good pop culture, that's why we're all here. That's why we're all on YouTube and talking, and that's what we care about. So I thought that was a great discussion to be had.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, it was an amazing discussion, and I hope those of you out there learned a lot and really got into the discussion, because we certainly did talk a lot about it. So we hope that it enlightened you. And for some of you who, if you're like me, you're like, okay, you know what, that's great. We talked about what it is, find, what it is, but that's not enough for me. I need a concrete example. I need to know what it is that I'm looking for. Is it this, not that? Is it red or is it blue? Is it crimson or is it garnet? Is it cyan or is it, capri blue? Which one, kind of is it? And from what you shared with me before our interview today, is that you come up with some girl boss categories, and I really, really do like how you did this, because this kind of gives people kind of guardrails, so to speak, about which way to go when you're evaluating media these days. So let's start with the first category, which you have, which is partnering. And the way you've defined it is adding a female sidekick or a partner to a male lead.
Right. So like what you just said, I'm in agreement. Being specific is very important, because that sometimes helps you find out how clear-headed you are about it. So if you're just like, oh, I'm mad at, a female lead, well, that's not very specific. That's pretty general. Is there a good reason to be frustrated with this? So I tried to be specific, or at least more specific than I ever had tried to be before, in order to have the discussion. And also, I just want to put a little asterisk. this is not meant to be the most exhaustive discussion possible, but it probably will be more detailed than you're used to. I do feel like this is a first effort to break this down a little bit. So I would say it's probably incomplete at best, but it's at least an attempt to narrow this down. And I love that word, guardrails, to put up some guardrails so we know what we're talking about. And Lorena and I talked about this in an effort to make sure that we're not only being negative. I'm including examples that worked. So we're going to analyze different categories of how Hollywood essentially have inserted female characters into stories, for better or for worse. And we know we can all think of examples that drive us nuts. I also want us to focus on some examples that we do like, or that have been successful at the box office, or at the very least. So anyway, and I think last time we talked, we pinpointed 2015 as the year that this trend really took off. So
yes.
Yeah. So what surprised me about this was that most of this comes from existing IPs. So what they're really doing is adding female characters to existing IPs that had a male lead in the past. So the first category we called, and these are just preliminary names just to help us narrow down what we're talking about, what I call partnering. And that is, I think you had already said it, adding a female sidekick or partner to a male lead. So there's kind of a co-ed spirit to these types of shows. And you already pulled it up. Ant-Man and the Wasp, I think, is a pretty classic example. I mean, her name is added to the title even. Now she is a comic book character, so she does have some existing lore here. In terms of the Marvel universe, though, it was very clear that what started as a franchise with Ant-Man is now going, he has to slide over a little bit and share the screen, share his time with the Wasp, which was Evangeline Lilly.
Yeah, I remember when I saw this film. First, I saw Ant-Man, and I wasn't too sure if I was gonna like it or not. And I watched it, and I oh my gosh, I freaking loved it. I loved it. I'm like, man, you know what? I really should have, because I didn't see it. I think I saw Infinity War before I saw the Ant-Man. I'm like, what the heck is going on? I didn't.
Oh wow!
Because I hadn't seen several, of the other like offshoot movies. Because I'm like, why should I pay attention? I just, the Avengers. So I went back and watched Ant-Man, and I'm like, man, this is actually pretty good. I had a good time watching it, and then I watched this one, and my question was, why do we have to deal with somebody with daddy issues? Aside from Scott Lang and his daughter, that was the dynamic that I wanted to see. So it's just like, why is this woman in this film? And for me, even if she wasn't the comics, which people had told me that she was, I'm like, okay, but it looks like she just basically came in, stepped all over Scott Lang's story, and he becomes secondary in his own film series.
Right. And I do think that you run that risk. If you're writing a story or filming a movie, and the movie is Ant-Man, and some advisory company comes in, or whatever, someone comes in and says, we want this to also be a shared franchise. It can work. It's not like this is guaranteed to fail. But you certainly run the risk of disrupting the story. And I would say the same would go if you had to do this in reverse. If it was a female franchise and you really wanted it to be about a male character alongside, which we don't see that too often, by the way, that we don't see the same thing happening in reverse. But, you run the risk of diminishing your original lead, which in this case was Ant-Man. So... And I would say Ant-Man and the Wasp, which, by the way, I didn't hate it as much as I think most people did. I do have kids, and sometimes if my kids are laughing at a movie, or if they're not bothered by something, sometimes I could sit there and watch it. And as a dad, I'm
Hmm.
happy that they're entertained and enjoying it. And that will
Right.
definitely soften the blow sometimes. And they did like Ant-Man and the Wasp. So I have to admit that. But personally, I did think that, or I should say that I was frustrated by what felt like a deliberate attempt to shoehorn in another character who now we are
Hmm.
devoting a lot of screen time to when we signed on for Ant-Man, so I think depending on like if you're in Game of Thrones, which is a franchise that has so many points of view, you can do a lot there. But in a
Hmm.
franchise that's focused on a single character, I think you have to be much more careful, trying to add a second lead into the story. It could backfire.
Absolutely. So we'll go from this example to a good example
Oh yeah.
of partnering, and I'm excited about this one because this show really subverted my expectations in a good way, and that would be
Oh yeah.
Cobra Kai.
Yes. So yeah, Cobra Kai obviously is a male centric franchise from stories that had male leads, Karate Kid
Hmm.
from the 80s. And these are universal. The first Karate Kid, I would say, is universally a loved movie. Um, and
Yeah.
I remember, how weird it was that when I heard they were going to make a spin-off TV show focused on Johnny Lawrence, I was like, what? And if you remember, it was YouTube Red. Remember that YouTube
Yes.
stream? And I literally subscribed to it just to watch Cobra Kai, and I freaking loved it. And
Same.
um, and so here's a franchise that started with focusing on Johnny Lawrence, and by default Danny LaRusso,
Hmm.
and they expanded their roster to include several female characters. His daughter, his wife, Johnny Lawrence has a love interest in this, who's also the mother of Miguel. There's rival karate, and and every season they're adding, it seems like, new characters. And guess what?
Hmm.
It freaking is great. They have not diminished or taken away from the lead characters. I feel like they have added new storylines. I think it's easier to do in a TV show where you have more time and more hours and more script. You have more room to fit in these characters. And in that case, you're enriching and expanding the lore rather than shoehorning something in a 2-hour film that is really meant to be focused, that already has a lead character. So,
Right.
uh, I mean, what do you think? Have you seen the recent season?
Yes. And like you, I got YouTube Red just so I could watch Cobra Kai because when I saw the reviews about it, I'm like, really, how good could this show really be? It's like they already did the movies. I didn't watch Karate Kid Part 3 because I was just like, no, no, I'm not interested in it. The first one, I loved. The second one, I could take it or leave it. I neither liked it nor loathed it. It was just kind of there, and it was nice because they went over to Japan, so I thought that was pretty cool. But I was just like, why are people talking so much about the show? What good? How good really is this show? And then somebody told me, they said, look, they switched places. LaRusso is actually a jerk now. I'm like, what? Yeah, right. Try to get me to believe that. And within the first episode, I was hooked. And I
Hooked.
kept watching it, and I couldn't stop watching it. And I had to binge all of the episodes. And every time a new season drops, including this recent one, I have to binge and watch it. And it works because the way that they introduce the two female characters that are in there, one is Daniel LaRusso's daughter. So
Right.
that makes sense. So they have her, and then they also have another girl, Corey, who is not very privileged,
No.
at all, because she's had, a really hard life. She's taking care of a mom who has cancer, but we don't know that at first. We just know that she is just this tough chick who's just, you can't people can't get to her, but she's not perfect because, you know, she winds up screwing up and everything. So all of that, you know, all of that works, and it's perfect. They all, you know, bounce off of each other between dating one and then breaking up with the other one,
Oh my
and
God, it's a soap
so and
opera.
so thinks they're dating the guy I want to get. It all makes sense. It just the drama is just hilarious, but it's very relatable whether you watch the Cobra Kai films or you're a kid watching this show. There's so much that goes on, and the female characters are, you know, very well fleshed out. So it's a pleasure watching, you know, watching this, and I think that's one of the reasons why the show is so popular and why
Yeah.
it's going to be so hard when this season, when this complete
Oh,
show
I
wraps
know.
up.
I mean, they pulled a rabbit out of their hat with this. There's nothing conceptually that suggested that this should have worked. That you take an 80s franchise with one great film and, like you said, diminishing returns.
Mhm.
Karate Kid 2, I actually like Karate Kid 2, but like you said, it's a clear step down from that first classic. And then Karate Kid
Mhm.
3, I don't remember. I had to rewatch it and I ended up kind of liking it. But again, it's diminishing returns. If someone came to me and said, hey, we're going to take those 3 movies from the 80s and we're going to take 6 seasons and spin off episode after episode after episode, and we're going to actually center it on Johnny Lawrence, who is the villain of the first film. He's now going to be this sympathetic loser, character in this, and LaRusso is going to be viewed as kind of a privileged chud in a way. I would be like, there's no way this is a good idea. Like, there's no. So on paper, this should have failed, and it not only did it not fail, I would say it's a smashing success with great characters. And by the way, I was looking and it's charting pretty high on the Nielsen ratings. I just looked this up. Let me pull it up real quick. And this is as of right now. Now, of course, Nielsen is a couple weeks behind. So this is the week of July 22nd to July 28th. Overall on Nielsen, Cobra Kai is charting third place behind Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire, and Bluey. And then as far as original programming, Cobra Kai is number one on it's the number one show trending on Netflix. That's right now. So, you know, this is season 6, guys. So this is it's amazing the mileage they're still getting on this show.
Yeah, I'm constantly amazed how Hayden Schlossberg is able to do all of this. But there was one interview that he did where he was giving advice about if you're going to reboot a franchise, you need to respect the history of that franchise and not insult the fans that are watching, but at the same time create something that'll bring in new fans who will watch this and want to watch the previous movies. So he's really caught lightning in a bottle, and I think he's very smart in realizing, okay, you know what? We need to go out on a high note, and yeah, I'm kicking and screaming. I'm not happy that it's going to end, but at the same time, it's just like, okay, I think this is a good place where they can wrap the story up and just say, hey, here you go.
Totally. I actually wrote a blog a couple of years ago comparing Star Wars to Cobra Kai, because both of these shows took a hero from the original and spun it a little bit. And yet Cobra Kai still works. And I think it's because Daniel LaRusso still goes through his own arc. And he's ultimately, maybe in season 1, he started as kind of the, smug, privilege, kick the competition. But he goes through arcs and he does realize his faults and he tries to cope with that. He tries to become a better guy. We never doubted that he loved his children. So, there's still a lot to like about Daniel. And I would say he's recovered his character by going through this arc over successive seasons. Whereas Luke Skywalker, as portrayed in the sequel trilogy, he just makes this appearance at the end of Last Jedi. there's not a lot to like about him in that movie. And I actually, in writing, there's something called a Deus Ex Machina, which means God
Yeah,
steps in and
godlike
right.
machine.
Yes. And at the end of The Last Jedi, I call it a Luke Ex Machina, because he swoops in and tries to solves everything, but he's not even really there, and then he dies. And it's like, who wrote this? Who wrote this? So, Cobra Kai did a great job. And I think it's because the writers of Cobra Kai love the characters, added new characters that challenged, and a ton of female characters were added to this. And I think almost all of them work in all these seasons. So they've done a great job of making a co-ed, Cobra Kai story, which is all in the spirit of the Karate Kid.
Absolutely. Well, let's go to our next girl boss category that you have, Doug, and it is lead checking. Adding a female partner who puts the male lead in check.
Yeah, I think we've all seen this. It's a male-oriented franchise, and now they've added a new character in there, and it's not like partnering, where it's mostly where it's still a secondary character, but they add it, and she starts to take up some extra time. This is where the added character just starts, like shoulder checking the male lead and putting him down and kind of one-upping him in a way that's kind of off-putting to watch, because it's not funny, it's not endearing. It really comes across as a kind of a put down to your lead character in a way that doesn't feel earned. And yes, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is definitely one of those examples.
This was one where I was like, I hope this isn't true. I hope this is not true. And I watched it, and I was so angry when I watched this. So I'm like, you mean to tell me the Indiana Jones, with everything he's done, this is what you do? You bring in some chick to basically upstage him. You destroy his life, because granted, I have my issues with Crystal Skull, but at the end, Marion and Indy got back together. They got married, and their son Mac was there with them. Well, I didn't like the fact that in this movie, his son's dead. Mary's divorced him, and I'm just like, why? It made zero sense to me. I said I would love this movie if Short Round had come back, and it was like Short Round taking over, for Indiana Jones, where it's basically like, okay, I'm too old for this stuff, so I need somebody else. And it's almost like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, but it's him, and and it's Short Round. But this was a film with just nothing but just destroying his character. Yeah, I would have too. Oh my gosh, my favorite movie in that whole franchise is the Temple of Doom. I know it probably should be the Last Crusade, but I love the Temple of Doom.
You know what? Lorena, I recently watched Temple of Doom, because I remember always ranking it, and Raiders is still my number one, and I think Last Crusade is still my number two, but I always thought of Temple of Doom as kind of like a major step down, even though I generally liked it. I rewatched it recently, and I was blown away by how much I liked it again, and how much over the top action there is. It's actually spectacular action. And 30 something years later, I was still on the edge of my seat with the mine car chase, and I mean, it was just unbelievable. So I think I underestimated Temple of Doom. So when you said it's your favorite, I'm kind of like, oh, okay. So Temple of Doom is starting to age well.
I love that opening, because myself being a fan of like Hong Kong Kung Fu movies, the setting is just absolutely perfect. So that like gave me flashbacks from that time. So that's why I guess that's my guilty pleasure.
Yeah, he's in like the white tux with the red rose, like James Bond. I love that. That was a great opening. Like I said, when you watch it again, there's just action sequence after action sequence, and they're all insane. And so even tying that back into this, Indiana Jones always had a female counterpart. Marion Ravenwood in the first one, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, in Temple of Doom, there's Willie Scott. And then in The Last Crusade, there's Elsa Schroeder, I think is her name. And then, of course, Marion Ravenwood comes back for the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So I think one of the keys is, is it in the spirit of the first film, or is it in the spirit of the franchise? And, in the past, all the female leads were kind of like romantic interests. And I would also argue that unlike James Bond, who comes across, and I like James Bond too, but he comes across as like pure, overpowering, womanizing, massive male charm. Indiana Jones seems to have a sustained relationship with the women he's with in these shows. And my favorite is Marion Ravenwood by far. So to your point, no matter what you want to say about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I felt very fulfilled that they reunited those characters. And so that was really good. And they had a son and they were going to pass it on. And I'm not a big Shia LaBeouf fan or anything, but at least it was in keeping with the idea of passing the torch, right? I would have much rather had Short Round. Now that you say that, I would have much rather had that. But this film opens up with divorce papers from Marion, undoing all of that, which weakens the relationship in the first one and undoes the relationship in the fourth film. And there's nothing. He really they just erase it all, and he's just old Indiana Jones. So a complete misfire, and she makes she's very opinionated on things that seem like about capitalism and things that seem unrelated to the show. So it's called authorial intrusion, when characters start speaking lines that you really are aware that the person who wrote the film, that's their opinion, and now the character's like becoming a stand-in for the writer. You really don't want to do that. And I'm a writer. I've gone through writing groups with my book, and there's times where I have to remove myself from the story, and that's a good thing. The less Doug Burton is in the story, the better, because that means the more the characters are there. And I sensed a lot of Phoebe Waller-Bridge in Indiana Jones.
Oh, yes. And she was, it's like every time I saw her on the screen, I was just like, is something happened to her? Because watching it, it's just like, this is just the worst girl boss trope that's out there. And some people are like, well, oh, you don't like women in films. I'm like, no, let's take it back a little bit. If this was Indiana Jones and he had, we'll say, I don't want to call them minions or interns or however you want to call it, like from his classes, because remember he was teaching classes.
Oh yeah,
there
totally.
were women in his classes. So what a great opportunity, especially given this time frame, that you have this woman basically trying to do the same thing that he did, but she has actually spent the time learning from him. That would have been a good way, to do it as well, as opposed to just throwing this unlikable female character in there just to do it and to subvert one of the greatest heroes in film, Indiana Jones. It's so despicable.
Well, and the film failed. It's one of the least profitable films of all time. And Phoebe Waller-Bridge, it's rumored that her Lara Croft Tomb Raider show is getting canceled. So, the proof is in the pudding. If you turn in a bad job, if you give us characters that aren't relatable or inspiring, then you're probably going to fail as a storyteller. And I think it's a shame because, like we've said, and I want to make it clear, I am pro-heroine. I love great heroic women in my stories. I'm sure you do too. I think everybody does. But the way they're doing it in some of these cases is almost achieving the opposite. It's making me like recoil at some of these characters, not embrace them.
Exactly. Well, one character I definitely had no problem embracing, and it's funny considering that he was in this movie, that would be Puss in Boots: The Last Wish.
That's one I was hoping you would pick.
I love this film for so many reasons. Go ahead, Doug.
Oh yeah, sorry. I have pressure of speech, so cut me off anytime. Puss in Boots has lead checking. There's a female Puss in Boots. It's his show, right? They bring in Kitty Softpaws, and she puts him in check a lot. She's very antagonistic to him, and he doesn't get a free ride with her. However, this film freaking works. I remember taking my kids to see it, and at the time, I never even saw the first Puss in Boots. So it's a spinoff of a Shrek film. So it's a spinoff sequel. So we're really down the chain, right?
Yeah.
So I took my kids to see a spinoff sequel, literally planning to grab a drink at the movie theater, maybe eat some popcorn, and maybe grab 20 minutes of sleep. I assumed I was going to knock out. And I found myself watching Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And I was like, I think this is good. And I kept arguing with myself because I was like, this is a sequel spinoff. This isn't good. Then I was like, no, this is good. By the end of it, I realized that I had just watched a great film. And I became very interested to see the success of this. Because I was like, either I'm nuts and this spinoff sequel is excellent, or I am crazy. And I saw that it had legs at the box office. This movie ended up being wildly popular. I saw that it was getting great reviews, both from the critics and from the fans. My kids freaking loved it. I saw that it hit the streaming charts. This movie is an unmitigated success. And for a lot of reasons, there's a lot to relate to. And Kitty Softpaws, who is a lead, this classifies as lead checking. She's very tough on the lead male character. However, she's freaking awesome. I love Kitty Softpaws in this film. And I think she works for a couple of reasons. One, Puss in Boots is still portrayed as heroic in this. He's got a great opening number. Who's your favorite hero? It's over the top, right?
I freaking loved it. Yes, it was just so it was nuts. It was nuts. It's the kind of thing as a kid where you're just like, wow, are they really gonna go there?
Totally. Like, it was over the top, unmitigated, all about Puss in Boots in that. Who's your favorite fearless hero? And he's all over, and he has his heroic moment. He's like a champion of the people. He takes on some mythical character who's attacking the town, and then of course he's down to his last life. And then enter Kitty Softpaws, who's just hounding him in this one. And at first I thought I was going to hate her, but they give them some backstory. This is also why I think it works. He left her at the altar. He didn't show up, right? So all of a sudden we're like, well, yeah, that's not a cool move. But then we find out she never showed up to the altar either. So I was like, oh, so she's not like without fault, but clearly this relationship between, Puss and Kitty Softpaws was a misfire. And they're like fighting each other and arguing over this the whole way through. And in the end, she admits that she really does love him, and he admits he really loves her. And so they kind of find their way back into each other's lives. And so it's not a hollow ending. It's not anti-relationship or anti-male or anti-female. I thought this was great. She was putting him in check for a reason. They have a history. And he had his moments too. He pushed back, and there was some back and forth with these two. And I thought it worked very, very well.
Yeah, I did too. Granted, Puss in Boots, because again, it's a spin-off of the Shrek films, and I keep telling myself, and my daughter was the same way, like, I can't believe that's Antonio Banderas. I swear he had the best time. He shows up in Shrek 2, and then from there, it's like he gets his own movie, Puss in Boots. I'm like, nah, this isn't going to work. Totally worked. Absolutely hilarious. And he has his moments. And in The Last Wish, him going to the vet and finding out it's his last. First, he doesn't even think it's his last life. He's like, I don't know, what do I have, like 6 left?
Yep, I laughed so hard at that.
They go back, and oh my gosh, that was some Tom and Jerry comedy going on. They get back Every single one that happened. And I loved how they did that. It was just comedy gold, how they show what
Comedy
each
gold.
one's. So by the time you get there, it's like, yeah, he is down to his last one and he does not know what to do with himself.
Yeah, it's so funny because they're like, first death, second death, and then they go all the way up to 8. And he's like, what is that, like 4? It's like, no, dude. And you know what else is they portray him scared, which is something that is a major criticism, like Luke, Jake Skywalker, and so negative portrayals of male leads is another common criticism. And this movie has that, and yet it works. In fact, I got emotional at one of the scenes. There's a scene where he realizes, it's not a mercenary after him, it's death. And death always wins, right? And he finally panics and he runs away out of complete cowardice, which we understand because in real life we all get one life. So we understood why he would recoil, right? And he's like hyperventilating up against a tree, and that little dog Perito comes up and puts his head on him, and his heart rate drops. And I got emotional watching that. I was like, oh man, this is relatable. And that wasn't the end of the story. Puss has to re-enter. He has to re-engage and find it again. And I think that's what we want. We don't mind seeing characters lose their confidence. And I make this case with heroines too. Showing us a heroine who loses her confidence or has self-doubt is good. Not because it's a negative portrayal of a female character, but because real women will go through this and they want to see how she handles it. They want to see how she overcomes it. So showing us a woman with self-doubt, showing us a woman who has an insecurity, and then overcoming it is much more valuable than showing us a woman who lacks all of these shortfalls. Same thing with male heroes.
And it's funny you should bring that up, because another heroine that popped into my mind, especially in another way that made this film work so well, Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
Yeah.
I did not see that coming. And yeah, spoiler alert, where she's about to get that last wish, because in her mind, it's like she loves the bears, but she's like, I need a real family. I need to be back with my own family. So the bears made the sacrifice to say, okay, well, that's what she wants to do. Let's go and do it. And she had that wish right within her grasp, but her bear brother and family were in trouble. And you see the anxiety on her face, like, what do I do? What do we do? What do we do? And we think that the bears are gone, and she shows up right there. She's like, no, what did I tell you? You do the smash, I do the smash, you do the grab. That's how that works. And did not expect for that to happen. And she went, and as someone watching, I went from, oh, I can't stand this little snotty kid, to like, wow, that shows just how much she really loves her family. So I think I was literally clapping when I saw that part. I was so
awesome.
So happy.
Yeah. I experienced something similar. Like I said, I sat down with zero expectations. And so when Goldilocks showed up, I'm like, okay, we're in a spinoff of it. We're in a sequel of a spinoff, and here's throwaway character number 3 named Goldilocks. But she has a massive arc in this, and we understand her. So her wanting to ditch the family that's been loyal to her, the Bears, for selfish reasons is actually relatable. We've all experienced something that we want selfish. We've all been there, and yet we're all relieved to see that she doesn't follow through. And I think a lot of us are like that too. We might want something for a selfish reason, and hopefully we make the right call on that. And she does, and it's very rewarding. And she realized she was with her family the whole time,
Exactly.
and that's a reward.
I love that. But yes, I didn't see this in the theater, so I was like, whatever. Showed up on streaming, and I was just like, wow, this movie deserves all the money that it made. And I'm so glad that it was just so popular.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen it, go see Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Don't think what I did, that this is a throwaway sequel of a spinoff. This is this is animated cinema at its best. This is great stuff.
100%. Even my daughter, who's an animation art major, she loves this stuff.
Oh,
She just kept commenting on the different styles that they,
yes.
that they used, and she was just like, "Wow, this is freaking awesome." But we'll go from that to the next girl boss category, and that is called twin sistering, which you've had an invented female variant of an existing male character or story. And let's just rip the Band-Aid off here.
No. Right.
This is the one that got me.
Yeah. So twin sistering, you just create a female version of a male story. And so obviously Ghostbusters was a runaway hit in 1984 with comedians. You had Dan Aykroyd, you had Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, and who's the final actor?
Ernie Hudson.
Yeah, who's, by the way, aged very well. He's become one of the lead Ghostbusters in the revitalized franchise. So anyway, it was a male-centric story, and it was a comedy, and it was actually I've even heard people argue it's not a comedy. It's actually a serious story with comedic notes, which, there's a case for that. So here's 2016. They just did that with women. There's nothing else in the premise except it's a female version of a male story. That's why I call it twin sistering. And this is, in fact, there might be an example of a good one. And I put a couple in. I haven't seen one of them, so that might be a good example. But this one I'm less in favor of because it lacks initial creativity. When somebody pitched Ghostbusters back in 82 or 83 before it started filming, they had to have a premise for the story itself. Academics are, three guys are kicked out of academia and go into business together. And their business is like pest control, but for fighting ghosts that take over New York. That's the premise. That's bizarre. And that's why it just might work if you're a studio head. All the premises here is that, but women. That's the premise. So that lacks some fundamental creativity. And ultimately, this film was very, very bad.
I could not believe how horrible this film was. I had heard about it. As soon as I heard about it, I'm like, it's a freaking awful idea. I don't understand why they're even bothering, to make this film. And I want to say I didn't see it until I want to say maybe 2020, because that's when I started getting into the YouTube space. And for like, this film is freaking awful. I'm like, okay, all right. I said I wasn't going to see this. I'm going to sit down and watch it. And it was one of the worst films that I'd ever seen. I'm like, okay, Paul Feig, hope I said that right. Paul Feig wrote Bridesmaids, which is hilariously freaking funny. I laughed so hard watching Bridesmaids. This movie, I only laughed twice for about 2 seconds, and I think it was maybe the second hour of the film. You've got these comedians who in this movie are not funny. They're not interesting. There's nothing that makes me want to care about what happens to them. And Ernie Hudson showing up, I'm just like, dude, why?
Yeah, why? Well, they were trying to get, and by the way, I try not to fault actors too often, that they're getting paid to do this. And obviously he was paid to come in and his presence gave some legitimacy to this as a franchise reboot. However, this one did not work. And I think part of the failure here was that not only did they just twin sister this thing, like Ghostbusters, but girls, this is this is the early part of the new rhetoric we started hearing out of like legacy media. Like, if you don't like it, you are a bigot. And I remember hearing that slightly with Force Awakens, but it was like background noise. By Ghostbusters, it was like mainstream media calling it out. So the movie itself became politicized. And, the actresses took to social media on it. So suddenly it's not just Ghostbusters with girls. It's Ghostbusters with girls who are now flag bearers for like modern feminism. And if you have a problem with the film, then you must have a problem with feminism or women in general. And you're a terrible, terrible person. And that's so off-putting to hear, because it's like, whoa, that's a pretty big accusation you're putting out there to, a lot of people who liked Ghostbusters. And then secondly, the film wasn't that good. It's not like you had a classic on your hands and you're attacking the fans. You have a marginal film at best and a bad film or a horrible film at worst, and you're attacking the fans with that. So this was when I felt there was a tone shift between Hollywood and the way movies are covered in the media, and the relationship that these studios have with their fans.
Oh, I'm sorry, Doug.
No, go ahead.
That's also the other thing that I noticed with this film. I'd never seen, I'll say studios, because the studios, the actors turning on the fans. It used to be, okay, maybe some of y'all didn't like it, but we were hoping that you would, and no harm, no foul. Kind of just moving on from that. But no, it's just like, you're misogynist if you don't like it, you're racist if you don't like Leslie Jones in this movie. Why do you not like women in movies? What's wrong with you? There's space enough for everybody. Why are you gatekeeping? I'd never seen that before. And me just getting into the pop culture space at that time, I'm just like, am I taking crazy pills? Because who thought this movie was a good idea? Number one. Number two, it's nothing like the other two Ghostbusters films. So it doesn't seem to make sense. And another thing that I started to notice is that if you were a woman and pushing back about this, you get like internalized misogyny, some other made up term, or just flat out, ignored bringing this up. But you're right. This was the watershed for me, seeing how these studios started coming at people, and especially fans, for not liking something that is pretty much a garbage film.
Right. And again, I think that this film hurts women in Hollywood. It does not help them. When you start calling fans bigots because they don't like your movie, and your whole premise is Ghostbusters but girls, you're actually doing a disservice to actresses and other heroines that are trying to put together stories. To your initial point, we're at a point in Hollywood and in pop culture where when you say girl boss, people are like, oh God, I'm not even going to go see it now. It's got such a negative reputation. I just saw the trailer to War of the Rohirrim, and there's some girl bossing in it. It didn't start, the trailer actually starts okay, and then it looks like Galadriel from War of the Rings of Power, and I'm like, oh no. So now I guarantee people are going to refer to that trailer as girl bossing, and that's going to hurt the film, unfortunately.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard enough people respond and use that exact term,
really,
girl boss, and I'm like, well, considering what's been unfortunately done to the Rings of Power, well, we'll say to the Lord of the Rings franchise.
I sympathize with the goal of positive portrayals of women on camera. I get that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's room for criticism on that in the past. Like those are not nothing arguments. But at the same time, some of my greatest heroes have gone through such extreme vulnerability, and when overcoming that is what makes them the heroes. So when you start showing, a heroine or a hero just like steamrolling over people, especially if you're setting it in a medieval time when it was very masculine dominated in the military sense, and you're showing a female character like just batting them aside effortlessly, you're asking a lot of the viewer, and in this era, you're asking too much of the viewer. So people start to turn off, and that's earned by a lot of Ghostbusters 2016 movies.
Absolutely. Well, we'll go from that one. I know, folks, it's like, oh, I don't want to relive that movie at the begin. The next one that you have is Pseudo Her Story. Now, this is interesting. You define this as historical female pioneers who never existed. And I'm going to bring up a film that just encapsulates that for me. And I'm glad you put this on your list. And that would be The Woman King.
Right. So, and this is weird. So I wrote historical fiction about a female lead, Byzantine Empress Theodora. So she's real. And I decided that there is a take on her that I haven't quite heard before. And I set out to write the story. And it will ultimately be a trilogy. I'm writing the second book now. So I'm a little sensitive on some level, just out of pure interest, when there are historical fiction movies or television shows about a woman. Because I'm like, man, hopefully historical fiction will get really hot by the time this Empress Theodora stuff is ready to go. And then I started to run into some were really good stories, but then I found out like she never existed. And I'm like, well, that's weird. So they're painting the story like this is a female pioneer or like a great female woman of history, but she's not real. And I'm like, that's stupid, because can't you find a real woman in history that did something amazing? They're all over the place. Why make one up? So anyway, and I've heard the argument on this, that she's a composite of many historical elements that she embodies. Oh, I did think of one that it worked on that I can mention later. There is one that uses the composite argument, and I thought she was actually pretty good, but she never existed. But I would say this has not always worked, and this is an example of one that didn't work.
Yeah, this one I didn't know a lot about it. I do know about the kingdom of Dahomey, doing family research and tracing like where my ancestors came from. There is this particular area that I'm aware of.
Wow.
I'm aware of this is a section of Africa that had diplomatic relationships with the Kingdom of Portugal before any type of slave trading started to happen. The initial contact had nothing to do with that, but
interesting.
Had these group of people was like, what, if we want to get rid of people, we'll sell them into slavery. And there's actual documentation about people who were actually scared to do the everyday things that they needed to do, because it's very possible that they could get kidnapped by their own people and sold into slavery. So I knew those things from a historical point of view, documents that I've read, peer-reviewed books that other people have written. And then I hear about this film. And I'm watching and I'm just like, something didn't seem right to me. And from what I understand, that this General Nausicaa did not exist.
She didn't exist. They made her up as a stand-in to kind of reflect the times. Now, that's not an egregious error, but you're promoting the film as like, pioneering. This is like here's a woman warrior. You better respect her. And it's like, well, why don't you tell me about a real woman warrior instead of a made up one then? You know, if you're going to dive in there, obviously these women warriors were real. Pick a real one. Let's follow her story. I understand that when the history is incomplete or sparse, you have to, and I have to do it. You have to fill in the blanks, but it's the author's job to be as honest to what's missing as possible. When you're trying to tell the story of a real person, you know, if you want to wow us, tell us the story of a real person. If you want to kind of wow us, tell us the story of a made up person in a historical era. And if you want to turn everybody off, tell us the historical fiction about a fake person, and it's not necessarily a great movie. You know, that's just going to backfire.
Yeah, especially when they put this tag on here, inspired by true events. I mean, it's a film. You expect that there's going to be some kind of artistic license taken. But when you really start misrepresenting the facts and making it seem as, oh, you know, this kind of thing actually, you know, really happened. But like for someone like me, and I'm watching this film, and I'm like, no, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And it's just like, how this is beyond artistic license.
To like it. You know, obviously I'm writing a book on, I wrote at the time I was writing a book on heroines. So I wanted to include as many examples as I could. And I decided this one was, it was contentious too. There was some controversy around the subject matter and what this tribe did and whether we should be celebrating that. And so I decided it probably wasn't. And when I found out she wasn't real, that's when I was a little bit more, you know, all of those things together made me kind of veer away from it. And also there seemed to be a lot of, and this happens a lot in films too, they have this movie and they want to make sure that it is a positive portrayal of a female character. And so you start to see the gaming of the system through the film where they're trying to make it almost like better in every possible way. Like the female, and there's this in the early part of the film, there was like, they show this like utopian, like female society. And I'm seeing this in some films now where they're like in female only societies, there's this like utopianism. And I'm like, why are you doing that? You know, show me that they're flawed. Show me that they're as flawed as me so that I can relate to them. If you show me a bunch of people in this like utopian world where everything's fine, then I can't relate to those people. It's not realistic.
No, and anybody who's seen any reality TV with a bunch of women around knows it is definitely not utopia. Okay, just not going to work. But a good example, and this is a show that I have not seen, but I've heard a lot about it. That would be The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Right. So she is similar to the Woman King in the sense that she's kind of a composite character. And I've only seen the first season, which I liked. I did not love it. Like I didn't love it enough to keep going with it. But these days, and it's not out of hate or protest or anything like that. It's just, you know, there's so much content. Waiting a year, it has to really wow me for me to really come back and try to remember where I left off and who all the characters were. So I watched the entire first season of this, and I remember really liking it. It's about a female comedian in a male-dominated world, and I heard that she's loosely based off Joan Rivers. That's what I understood. But she's technically a made-up character. But there did seem to be, and she ran into a lot of adversity, obviously, and there seemed to be just really good writing in the show. So, and it won several awards. So, again, the proof is in the pudding. A well-written show does tend to live on. And I think she was nominated or even won for her acting, the lead actress.
I believe that's what I'd heard. This is one of those shows where I didn't have time to watch it, but most of the buzz that I have heard has been very positive. So this may have to go on my list to eventually go back and watch. But I love that premise there.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. I thought they did a good job. One thing I wanted to mention, one of the most egregious examples of this is a movie called The Aeronauts, which took a real event in history, which is two men, I want to say circumnavigating the world. They might have to double check me on that, but they're in a hot air balloon. Two men did this. They set some record, and they made a movie out of it about these two men that circumnavigate the world in a hot air balloon. But they changed out an actual historical male character person for a female. So she never, you know, it's like saying, you know, that the Wright brothers, like changing out one of them for a sister, and then making a movie about the first airplane with the Wright brothers, but you change out one of the actual brothers for a sister. You make up, like you actually gender swap a real person. I thought that was bizarre. Yeah, like she didn't exist. It was a guy that existed that did this, and they just made him a female. I thought that was really bizarre, because now you're giving a woman credit for something she didn't do, because she didn't exist. So anyway, I thought that was a bizarre form of this.
That's insane, but wow,
bizarre.
Yeah, that's just wrong on so many levels. That gets my hackles up, because as someone who's, I want to say, for maybe the past 5 years or so, 5 to 10 years or so, trying to meticulously record my family's history, and not just that, but with other documents, with other records, with other, peer-reviewed journals, stuff like that. It really aggravates me when there's this egregious thing that's done with respect to history. I mean, yeah, it's like, okay, it's your art. No one can tell you, how you should be able to do your art. But at the same time, that if you do that, don't expect for some people to just lie down and take it, or they, just will not want to see your film based on that. So it's like, if you're going to do that, there needs to be some kind of crazy payoff.
Yeah, well, you just, at that point, if you're going to make a composite character who never actually existed, and portray her, so women in history is becoming a big thing. I would argue that it's always been a big thing, but there's new attention on it, in that we're trying to find more and more examples of women's contributions in history. And lo and behold, there's tons of contributions. So this is a good thing. So when you take someone who didn't exist, on the grounds that you're taking a composite of real events and real people and kind of personifying it, that's when your ability as a writer kicks in, because now you've got a character. Now it's up to you as a writer to tell a story that took place, amongst historical events, and really drive it home, because at that point you've invented a character. You've made up a character. So now you're in the realm of fiction, historical fiction, but with a made up character. Now you have to deliver as a storyteller beyond the historical account. So, a good writing will work. Another show that actually did this well was Chernobyl. Did you see Chernobyl?
You know what? I didn't.
It came out.
I missed that one.
Yeah, it came out roughly the same time that season 8 of Game of Thrones was infamously crashing and burning. So while Game of Thrones was suddenly dying a terrible death, Chernobyl came out, an HBO series, and there's a Russian. It's about the Chernobyl reactor, and there's a Russian woman in it, and she is trying to figure out what went wrong. And she's actually a great character. And I found out she's not real. They made her up. But the storytelling is so compelling, and her character was written so well, it totally didn't matter. They landed it.